This podcast contains spoilers, so listen at your own risk or call back after you've watched the movie.
You know who you call. Leave a message. Maybe they'll call you back. Then again, maybe they won't.
We're having ourselves quite a little game of phone tag here.
Ring, ring, ring. I usually get this guy's answering machine.
I'll call you right back.
If you're there, please pick up the phone. I really want to talk to you.
I check my fucking messages every day when I come home from work. My answering machine, zero. I got a blinking light.
All I have to do is pick up this phone right here, inform the cinema, and your plan's kaput.
No, I ain't got no phone. I had to pull, because people calling all the time, and who needs the aggravation, right? Interruptions.
Hey man, rainy old Tuesday morning. Not too bad. Little bit of light drizzle in the air, but definitely weather's changing. Still quite mild. I'm feeling like a man reborn right now. I've been getting a lot of bad sleep lately, and by lately I could really be talking about the last 4 years of my life, but certainly over the past couple of weeks it's been just disrupted a lot. And last night I got a miraculous, must have been about 10 hours sleep. Went to bed super early. I was like, you know what? I feel like I might be able to sleep, and I feel like I could be shooting myself in the foot here. It could be one of those things where you just go to bed and you lie in bed for hours and you frustrate yourself that you can't sleep, and it consequently don't sleep until even later than you would have if you'd stayed up a bit more. But I rolled the dice and came good. So yeah, when my daughter finally came into the bedroom, I heard the door open. I heard her pitter patter of little feet, and here's one of the people from my nursery here across the road. But yeah, she's across the road. Dirty me small talk. So yeah, when she finally made it in, I was like, "Hey, how you doing? Morning." Yeah, she came in. I'm like, all right, okay, what is it? Is it 2 a.m.? Is it 3 a.m.? I've probably gone to bed early enough that I won't get back to sleep now. And I checked my phone, and it was almost 7 a.m. So yeah, mountains of sleep. I feel like I'm like a superhero now, just like marching through the streets, like not a fucking ache or pain or an ounce of tiredness in my body. Have my cup of tea, have my sandwich in the morning, heading in for my weekly day in the office. And I wanted to send you a voice note about Suspiria, the original. I believe it's 1977 that it came out, Dario Argento. So I about halfway through my annual Spooktober of watching a horror film every day throughout October. And prior to embarking on the month, you sent me a message of a couple of movies that you were interested in seeing that were from my slate. So I think Suspiria was on that list, so I thought I'd send you a voice message about it. We can maybe have a conversation. I wonder what your exposure is to, well, a number of things. One, Suspiria, the original movie. I'm presuming you haven't seen it because I don't really see you as someone who would want to return to it, but maybe I'm wrong on that score. Then Suspiria, what would it be, 2018, 2019, something like that. Remake by Luca Guadagnino. Not sure if you've seen that. It was a fairly major movie, but also you're not as big of a horror guy as me. I constantly refer to you as like someone who's not a big horror person, but I think really you are a fairly big horror person. It's just by contrast you're not. But also the films of Dario Argento, I think if you haven't seen Suspiria, you probably haven't seen any of them, because that's kind of his calling card. That's his most famous movie. He's fairly prolific. He's made quite a lot of stuff, and I've maybe seen 3 or so beyond Suspiria, and they're quite different. They're in the giallo genre, whereas this is, like a supernatural witch film. There's no real other way to put it. It's a witch film. It's obviously bottom, obviously, but it has got notes of giallo in it, because the film's the other giallo films that I've seen by him, and he would be one of the significant giallo filmmakers like Mario Bava. His films are scored by Goblins a lot of the time, who did Suspiria. The blood color is very consistent with giallo cinema in general, and kind of the staging, the sort of the pacing in a way of how it will be soap opera scene, then long, elaborate, drawn out, built up, like super highly orchestrated and complicated death scene that's incredibly iconic. So going kind of back and forth with that rhythm makes it a film that I think, although not a classical giallo film in that it's not like a Hitchcockian serial killer type thing with the black gloves and all that, it is a good entree to the giallo genre, because if you like these things, if you like a lot of the aesthetics and the whole tension and release and the spectacle of Suspiria, then it's a good entree into that genre. But Suspiria is one I had seen. There's a lot of films. Let me just rewind a bit here. So I would say I became a film nerd in 1999. Certainly loved films before then, and a big fan of certain things like Jim Carrey, for example. But 1999 was the year that I really got nerdy about, like, who directed this? What else did they do? How did they make this movie? What movies influenced this movie? I've started that journey that has been a source of constant inspiration and company for both of us, and a major part of our relationship ever since, decades now. So, kicked off a great passion of mine, I would say, that year. Fortunate enough to be sort of coming of age during what is debatably the best year in cinema history, and if not the best, then certainly in the top 10, I would say, or at least American cinema. And then what I did is I was living in the Irish countryside, and life moves pretty slow there, so I ended up just kind of devouring as many significant films as I could. So there's a lot of films, Suspiria being one of them, a hell of a lot of films that are like the most acclaimed films in their genre, but I've only seen them when I was a teenager and too young to appreciate them really. There's a lot of films, like let's say The Deer Hunter is a good example of this, where I've gone back and watched it in later years and I've been like, holy shit, this film is a fucking million times better than I thought it was. And it's a bit of a shame in a way, because I've kind of undercut some of these masterpieces by watching them too early. But when I go back and watch them now, like I can barely remember a week ago, never mind decades ago, but still as I'm watching them, it's like, oh yeah, right, I know what happens here. And I remember when I watched the remake to Suspiria, seeing certain gags, like one of my favorite scares in all of cinema. And it's probably because of the impression it made on me as a teenager, rather than necessarily how effective it would be to me now seeing it for the first time, but is the looking through the window, like your head right up close to the window, so you can see out fully, you can see everything out there, and then a hand smashing through the window, like just that, how that sort of rule that breaks the rules, and how shocking it is. Kind of a bit like the way the killing of the private detective is presented in Psycho. It's very unusually staged, and it sort of flies in the face of your expectations of how something is going to be shot and presented to you, so it's all the more shocking. But now, watching this film now, I've got a lot more context on it. Obviously, I've watched thousands of movies since then, which they're all adding to my kind of cine literacy, and I kind of watch this now, contextualizing it within Italian cinema, the cinema of the 1970s, the evolution of horror, Dario Argento's work, the films that this has kind of influenced over the years, and I guess witch cinema as well, which is a genre I'm less, I don't even know if it's a genre, but it's a subject that I'm less exposed to. It's not necessarily my favorite thing, but I love it in this movie. I think I love the way it's presented. It's kind of a hagsploitation movie, even though there isn't really, other than the kind of unseen matriarch of the whole coven, there isn't really any hags in it. Like, they're all quite young compared to, like, I'm thinking back to The Witches, which is also a film I haven't seen since I was a kid, but Roald Dahl's The Witches, when they all take off the wigs and everything. Like, this film doesn't really go into that sort of grotesquerie, but it is still just scary. Maybe it's more scary as a man as well watching it, where it's this like fortified group of incredibly powerful and aggressive women. Like, there might be something to that as well. But anyway, I think when I saw it as a kid, or not a kid, a teenager, it didn't, I thought some bits were scary, but a lot of it I was like, what the fuck is this? I mean, I was probably used to watching Scream and the like, which were very shiny American kind of sexy movies, and then this, it almost felt like kind of hippie-ish in like how colorful it was and everything like that. Watching it now, like, I love Argento's color choices in his other films. Like, I love how heightened and stylized his scenes are, kind of like Nicholas Winding Refn a bit, where it's like you're watching a dialogue scene, or you're watching just someone coming home and getting out of the car and getting into their house or something, and it's going to have like fucking insane green lighting with like red highlights and this insane over-the-top score. But I love it. I mean, I absolutely adore all of those elements. And I think more and more in recent years, maybe things are turning for the better now, but certainly throughout the 2000s, 2010s, I felt like there was a boringness to how stylized things were. I felt like it was, you were rarely watching a film, and, or at least the big films, you're rarely watching them and being like, this feels like a really stylized art piece. It was more things presented as they were, in a way. And so going back and going like, the way this sounds and looks and everything about it screams a specific artistic viewpoint, not just all coming from one person, because it's a collaborative medium and he's, you know, taking advantage of the talents of other people, certainly in the music. But yeah, it's great to see it now, and had a really, really good time revisiting it. I love all the different witches. Is one thing that I didn't remember is how late in the day we get confirmation that they're witches. It's kind of that scene with Udo Kier, who I didn't recognize at first, but it's nice to see him again. Like, every time I see him, he's in like a country from a different origin, in a different era. Like, he's in Ace Ventura, he's in like that Brazilian, what's that Brazilian film called? Bacau or something. Like, he's just pops up everywhere and in all different eras of cinema, all different countries. Like, he must have one of the craziest filmographies. But that scene with him and then his friend who looks like J.R.R. Tolkien a bit, who are just kind of brought in for an exposition dump right at the end of the movie, and then she goes back to the mansion, sneaks around, and she makes it into that room where all the she's spying on that room where the witch is the second in command, who I guess is the favorite student of whatever the witch is called. I forget what the old Greek witch that first set up the place is called, with Maria something. I can't remember. But she spies on them, and they go, we need to kill that American girl And that's the first time we've ever actually on screen visibly seen any of these witches be an aggressor, like show their true colors. And we're probably about 7 minutes shy of the ending at that point, maybe even less. Then she goes into the room where we get the head witch, and she manages to locate her via the lightning bolts and stab her in the neck. And it's interesting that the witches actually being witches and sort of directly chasing her and stuff like that, or even like fucking with her at all, because I guess they like drug her with the not drug her, but like magic drug her with the food, but they don't really chase her or do anything. Like, it's all other girls that get taken down, but the witches as sort of like direct on-screen malevolent forces are absent from the entire movie, bar the final 5 minutes, which is definitely not the way that someone would make it now, but it is sort of consistent with Giallo, where it's always a masked killer that you don't know who it is, and you find out as a twist at the very end. So like I said, there's quite a lot of Giallo DNA in this, but it is a supernatural witch thing. My favorite thing about his work, and I say opera is my favorite example of this, but I love the ideas that he comes up with for scares. Like the girl who's kind of her best friend, who was the best friend of the girl who died at the beginning as well. When she's being chased, now it sometimes have sort of ridiculous, stupid stuff, which I think that's where you're going to get pissed off. Like, for example, why is the person chasing her carrying a butter knife to open that lock? And why does it take them 45 years to open that lock? I can see things like that happening and you getting really frustrated and you going, if something this shit is in the movie, then why am I, like, how good can the movie be? To me, you kind of have to give in to the operatic nature of it all. And the reason why it takes him so long to open the lock is artificial, but it's to make that scene longer, essentially. It's kind of like when the Bond villain does this big monologue about, like, instead of just shooting James Bond in the head, he does this big it's like, you either enjoy that, like you either go, I want to hear this monologue and I want to hear him say badass things, or you go, fuck this movie. Just passing over a busy overcast here now, so might get a bit of noise pollution. About 2/3 of the way to the office. So I don't mind that stuff, because when I'm watching it, I'm like, I'm watching a great movie and I've got great stuff 2 minutes ago and I'm going to get great stuff in 2 minutes. And this bit, yeah, it might be a bit loosely edited. It could have been tightened up a bit, but like, come on, Dario, I know you're going to give me great things. And like, she climbs up on all those suitcases with his tension in that. Like, they're wobbly, bottom one breaks. She climbs through that little window. She gets into the next room. We can't see the floor. It's dark. She's just looking across the room at the open doorway, and she dives in. She falls into this pit of wire. And again, like, this is probably a division point. I can imagine there being a part of your brain that's going, why the fuck is there a room full of like all uncoiled wire? What? Whereas I'm watching, I'd be like, this is fucking incredible. Like, this is amazing. Just the sound and the visual of just her writhing about in a pit of wire. How much as an audience member you can feel that, feel them getting taut around your skin. It's almost like Indy falling into the pit of snakes. Just like such a like, no, I do not want to be in this pit of wire. And then she gets killed. But it's stuff like that, or like the kill of the blind guy, for example, where the witches ultimately sort of fly in invisibly. I mean, we never really, not much is clarified, but maybe it's the lead witch, or who knows, and kind of magic the dog via hypnosis or whatever into killing his master, but you don't know what's going to come. And it's in this insane location. I don't know if it's a real location, or if these are like matte paintings or what. I really don't know what. Like with all of his films, it's like they don't really hang around much reality. This film is set in Germany, but I'm assuming it was all shot in Italy. Maybe it wasn't. We get like a bar scene where it's all these like Bavarian people in lederhosen dancing around the tables. It's like, this couldn't feel more like trying to pretend it's Germany, but it's not Germany. And in all of his films, like all the actors would just speak their language and then it would all be dubbed afterwards. I was watching it with my wife and her sister who are Spanish, and the young handsome guy, it's kind of like a suitor to the main girl. He's a very famous Spanish actor. Obviously the lead is an American actor. We got Udo Kier, we got all sorts of different people. Udo Kier's dubbed. You watch it in the English language, he's dubbed by an American actor. And you know, even when he made Italian movies like that were set in Italy, still the cast would just be like, he'd hire people from all over the shot and then dub everyone into Italian. Even the Italian people would just dub themselves because they didn't have the audio like recorded on set. So there's a bit of a like non-specificity, even though all of his films are stated as being taking place in a particular place. There's also a bit of a like, they're set in Dario Argento land. So when you get that like massive big courtyard that the blind guy's walking through with his dog in the middle of the night, seems like a fucking nightmare to navigate as a blind person. It's like, how do you even know which direction you're headed? But anyway, that's by the by. The main thing is, this is a fucking epic, crazy, it's almost like something from a cartoon or something. It's like crazy big courtyard. What is this? Where is this? What are we looking at? And then like, why is he even here? Fucking middle of the night, not a soul around. Fucking acre of a place. And the witches are coming in, they're flying. We get these shots, which probably would have been quite complicated to do before drones existed. And then we don't know what's going to happen, but then it's his dog that jumps up and kills him. And yeah, there's a lot. I think every time someone gets killed in this movie, you're either like, if you're not enjoying the hell out of that, then this movie and his work in general doesn't really have that much to offer you, I would say. This is considered his best film. It's not my favorite of his films personally, but it is brilliant, and it does show you what he has to offer, what he had to offer. So yeah, I'm not sure there's that much else to say, but really glad to have caught up with this one again and kind of like filled in some of the blanks between seeing it as a teenager, kind of liking some things about it, but ultimately sort of dismissing it, and then decades of seeing it listed very high on lists of the best horror films of all time. Now catching up with it again, I'm like, yeah, I can see how, I mean, as much as like I enjoy watching it now, but like seeing it in the cinema in 1977, like literally 1977, like Jesus Christ, the fucking sensory overload and like the insanity of that experience. Even seeing it in the cinema now, I think would be like pretty overwhelming. But yeah, let me know what you thought of it, and let me know kind of what your history is, if you've seen this film before, what your expectations were and so forth. And yeah, I'm almost at the office now, so put my nose to the grindstone.
Hey man, just going for a walk now in the park before I start my overtime. My days now are quite long. I start at 7 o'clock in the morning, and then by the time I'm done with my overtime, it's 4:30, 5 o'clock. So big long days now. So just going to do a lap or two before I start my overtime and get back to you. I love your new extra, well, let's not call it pressure, but extra thing to consider while watching movies that you either know you're going to send me or know that I'm going to watch. This watch along with me when I'm not even there. Ooh, I don't know if Andrew would like that. Oh, I don't know. This could go either way. It's like I'm following you as a passenger on your journey. For the record, when I say I'm going to see a movie, then you don't really have to worry about the pressure. Not that you need to worry about pressure anyway, but it seems like you're, oh God, will you like this? When I've already said beforehand that, oh, I want to see that movie, oh, I'm going to add that movie to my list, it's because I already had an interest in it anyway. So at that point, you're kind of off the hook, no matter what I'll think of it, because I was going to watch it either with or without you. Now, in our other chat, our normal everyday life chat, you have given me a preview of Suspiria, which we talked about in earlier movie conversations, where if a movie's not necessarily my bag, you'll sell it to me very briefly beforehand in order to give me the best possible chance of liking it, both by my request and just something we thought would be a nice thing to try with something you're very passionate about. Now, even though you sent the voice note, I had seen the movie by that point, so I haven't actually listened to it. But maybe in between this voice note and in between this conversation, I might go back to it and see if I agree with you and how you sold the movie to me in retrospect. Just something I want to ask you before I get into my thoughts. What language did you watch this movie in? I know you mentioned the dubbings and whatnot, and from my understanding from Italian cinema, especially with spaghetti westerns, everyone speaks their own language and then it gets dubbed anyway. So I noticed the copy you gave to me, shall we say, it had an Italian version, but the subtitles didn't work for me. So my version was the English dub. So a question I have for you is there subtitles all throughout the version you watched? As in, are the English parts now dubbed with Italian? Is everyone dubbed in Italian in the version you've watched? Or are the English dubbings still in English, just with Italian subtitles to understand all the other bits in all the other languages anyway? Because for me, I'm a stickler for authenticity, and the original version is the Italian version, even though there's a lot of dubs on top of that, so it kind of doesn't matter as much as other movies. But I had this problem when I downloaded the Great Silence recently. I wanted the original version, and again they did that whole thing with the dubbing of all the actors. So I'm thinking, okay, maybe I'm okay with the English version, and then I was told after extensive research, which was very hard to find, that the Italian version that's dubbed is the one you're meant to get instead of the English version that's dubbed. So for all intents and purposes, I watched the version I think that American audiences would have got, which is the Suspiria dubbed version, all in English. The original one is the Italian one. I don't know which one you ended up watching, but normally I'd have a problem with the one I watched, but I had limited time to get a better copy. But also, the visuals are so striking in this movie, and are such a unique part of it, that I felt very happy not to have to look at subtitles for a single second in order to immerse myself in this movie, because it is, on a visual sense, spectacular. Now, there's one version of this movie that I watched, and just to say, I like the movie. There's one version of this movie, and there's one analysis of this movie, I suppose, where, and this is how I felt to an extent. I didn't find it scary. The plot, in terms of the focusing on the plot, is very threadbare and doesn't really amount to a sustained narrative, shall we say, in terms of what we'd expect in a traditional sense. That's one way of looking at this movie, and that's something that was certainly there, But on the other hand, in the same way someone like Tim Burton creates his world, and I think it's very interesting, we often talk in terms of artists and just people who are trying to be artists like me. I'm failing at it, but I don't know if you've got the struggle as well. Taking everything you have from your mind and putting them out on whatever canvas it may be, whether artistic, in terms of drawing, photographic, visual, in the medium of film. Getting everything from your mind and transporting that so everyone can see it must be one of the biggest struggles of an artist, just transferring your thoughts, your images, your ideas, and actually turning them into something physical is probably the greatest struggle of any artist. And I feel like someone like Tim Burton has managed to do it and excel, where I feel like he's getting every thought he has, every idea, every creation from his mind. I think he's succeeding of getting it out on film. Now that might be true or not, but he is giving certainly the illusion of succeeding at every beat, everything that's in this world. And I think Dario Argento is probably the only other person that really springs to mind outside of, shall we say, animation, because there's a lot of stop motion where they seem to succeed. Actually, I don't know if the Nightmare Before Christmas, Tim Burton, I don't know. But certainly things like a Studio, like Caroline, all these things, they're definitely able to transfer their mind to the canvas, so to speak. But I feel like in a live action setting, without a reliant on special effects maybe and things like that, which never really feel like something that accurately transfers a thought and how humans visualize. I don't think CGI ever succeeds in that, and I don't think humans ever visualize in CGI. They much more visualize in something like Batman Returns, where Batman's going through the city, and movies like this, it feels like someone's mind has been turned inside out and shook out, and that's what we get. So you asked the question, would Andrew have a problem with this and that, with various things that happen in this movie? The answer is a resounding no, because of this movie is operating on a completely different atmospheric, visual and tone level than anything I've seen before. There's not a wasted second of a shot in this movie, and very often I am not someone who can be sustained by visuals. Take Wes Anderson, for instance. Beautiful visual maestro. His worlds are their own thing as well. I suppose that's another example. Dario Argento is probably Wes Anderson if something horrible happened in his childhood. Maybe we would get something like this. But with Wes, I feel like, and obviously his fans, and you're one of them, might disagree, but I feel like it's just all visual. And I say just because that's a hell of a thing to achieve, but I feel like I'm not connecting with anything else emotionally with Wes's movies. But with this guy Argento and this, I was really bowled over and blown away with the type of visuals and how they're implemented in this movie. So for instance, in the beginning of this movie, we get a scene with the American actress, don't know her name now, out for a walk. I don't have the luxury of of having all these names beside me. But anyway, the main actress, when we see her, when she arrives in, well, I presumed Italy because the version was Italian, but you're right, this is a very German placed aesthetic. So when she arrives at the airport, she is in the back of the taxi, and just the change of the lighting. Obviously there's constant use of red in this movie, but the change of the lighting it goes green, it goes blue from the sprinklers, and just the color palette in this movie. Do you know what it reminds me of? And again, you're probably well seasoned with the actual explanations for Dario Argento's work, or maybe there's a what's the word, an agreement between people who've studied his work of what it is, and how I'm viewing this is probably put to bed in different arguments and explain better. But this is just my experience with it, just as coming across this movie like I would without any explanation or context. So when she's in the taxi and when she's going by these different places and the lights and the color is changing with the sprinklers, it reminded me of the beginning of when somebody is on stage and the spotlights are showcasing what's about to happen, and it's almost the beginning of the show. And what I found really fascinating about this movie is, I don't know how often you go to the theatre. I certainly don't go very often at all, but the few times I have, I went to see things like Les Mis, and what else did I go and see? The Lion King, probably went to see Othello, and all these productions where obviously they need to make physical sets, and obviously they need to make it seem like there's constant movement and things happening and different scenes and different stages at different locations, but they can only do that from the stage. It's almost like they're bound to the stage. This movie and how this movie is portrayed and how things are portrayed on a scene to scene basis is fucking fascinating to me. It's almost like somebody who is really interested and has extensive experience in stage and in the theater has taken those techniques and taken the show on the road and used the same type of things and methods and techniques that you would normally see confined to a stage, but incorporate them into a movie, and with the actual genuine movement of camera and with the actual framing and different things you can do, and combine the two, which is fucking amazing. I don't think I've ever seen it done in a way like this. Obviously, we've seen things that try to do this from an almost exercise type of way, like Birdman, where okay, we're gonna do it an illusion of one take, and it's gonna be this type of thing. Whereas this feels like, not to say Birdman's dishonest, although it is dishonest in the way it tries to hide the takes, but this is a much more honest and grounded showcase of all that is good about theatre, being giving a new lease of life within the genre of film. So that's brilliant. I think he used the term the operatic elements, which is a very good way of putting it. I didn't have that thought, but while I was watching this, none of the things that are based in horror that would normally bother me, like you mentioned the butter knife and the barbed wire and all that. Yeah, normally in a much more straightforward movie, then those type of things would bother me. But I think because of how this movie was constructed, I mentioned the theatre nature, we literally get a look behind the curtain of both what the coven is doing in this story, but also we get characters literally going behind the curtain within their own movie almost at times. We get behind the stage of the stage, if you know what I mean. So that allowed me, and I again, I could be talking absolutely way off here, but I think that allowed me to look at horror a different way, and not to say it's completely a way in, but it certainly gave me a wavelength to certain things that annoy me about the genre. Now, I think even though this is very much witches and whatnot, I think the most it helped me get more in tune with is probably the easiest genre for me, which is slasher movies in general. But there's something about how these characters are showcased and their movement and the fluidity of their movement. It's almost like exploring horror and the movement of it through contemporary dance, and also in the way they express themselves, especially the main character, is almost performative theatre. And obviously I'm talking mainly about this movie, but then I started thinking, we talked about Smile 2 there the other day, and you were talking in glowing terms of the main actress, and I thought, okay, well, there's something I'm missing here, because I'm being taken out of it by what she's doing when she's staring at the screen, and there's a type of performance going on. Now, obviously, you were genuinely scared and genuinely convinced by her performance, but at the same time, you're so deep down the horror rabbit hole, who knows what mechanisms are giving you that experience. But then I thought, okay, if I'm applying what I'm giving in Suspiria, if I'm applying that logic to other movies like Smile 2, and how she's moving and how it is like very dance-like, in order, I mean, she's got her dancers following her around in that scene in Smile 2. If I'm applying that type of wavelength, and again, I'm sure the scene was designed to scare you, but if I'm applying something like that to Smile 2, then I'm looking at a different wavelength, and I'm appreciating it in another way that I didn't previously. That's all I'm trying to say. So yeah, I think I think I've never realized how horror uses these type of dance technique and this type of choreography and this type of movement in order to make you feel in the same way dance does on stage, or the same way movement within the confines of a stage make you feel. Then maybe the things that annoy me are serving another function in a different way that I just didn't realize before. For instance, and the thing that springs to mind is in the movie Scream. Now that I'm looking at Scream in my mind's eye, just in how the ghost face moves around and how the flowingness of the gown. I mean, this sounds like absolute bullshit, but I am actually being very genuine in how I'm looking at these things now after this one movie, Suspiria. Then when I'm thinking of movies like Halloween, or especially slasher movies where it seems like the character is running silly, they're falling over, they're making wrong decisions, they're going into that basement, they're stumbling over something, and meanwhile we have the killer walking composed, or maybe not even being able to be seen until a moment. Didn't realize how much of a dance was going on there, and how much of a show is being interpreted, and how much of a scare is being interpreted. Now, regardless if I am actually scared or not, I didn't quite realize how much of a show I was getting, like I said, until this movie. So I think that is, yeah, that's been a little bit of a realization for me and how I'm going to be looking at some other things in the genre. And the other thing that was amazing to me was the main actress, how she moves. And again, this comes back to dance, but there's something a little bit more as well. How she moved and how she was framed with her big doe eyes, and usually in the middle of the frame, surrounded by two actresses, sometimes off camera. How she was framed and just how she moves, almost on a, you know, sometimes when you're playing video games and what is it, the FPS, and they're moving in a way that either, I don't know the technical terms for it, but they either seems like they're moving so fast there's a few frames missing, or it's at such a type of resolution that it's not moving as fluid as they should be. Therefore, it looks like it's more fluid, but almost unnatural. Don't know if that makes sense to you. So she moved like that, and what that ultimately means is did you ever see when they're doing Ariel and Belle, and where they're drawing the live action actresses for the Disney movies, and you see the actors and actresses that are doing the movements that the animators are basing that on, and just how heightened it is. I think we get a live action version of that type of Disney princess animation in this, and what that does is it really heightens every emotion that you're going to get. When she looks scared, she looks extra scared. When she looks surprised, she looks extra surprised. And again, maybe this is something, if in Smile 2 that was, I mean, it seems obvious now with Smile 2 actually as well, because the whole thing is based around the production. But anyway, I digress. Yeah, it seems like the type of thing where if it, because this movie is so embedded in false sets being drawn on the walls, literally curtains where they're sleeping. If I wasn't so aware of it, and I think it's intentionally so with this guy, it kind of has to be really, but again, I don't know. Yeah, I just think it did a great job of putting me on that wavelength in a way that other movies wouldn't normally do, but at the same time it opened me up to the wavelength, which is lots of things it does. And you mentioned the scene with the barbed wire, and that, yeah, in a different movie I would have been thinking, why is that there? But because again I was tuning into the wavelength of at least this movie, I'm thinking, okay, that's designed to make us feel a certain way. Everything is designed to make us feel, and it's in service of making us feel this way. So there wasn't a conflict, because I think sometimes if it's too much of a very straightforward narrative, and then you're putting stuff in just to make me feel a certain way, it's in conflict with the vibe of the film. Whereas this film is the mood piece anyway, so when you bring in stuff to heighten the mood and absolutely fucking crazy stuff happening, it doesn't make sense. Because it's a mood piece, it's just, okay, well, you're just changing the mood, now you're enhancing the mood, you're really just adding more to the elements you've already established. Now there's another element to this movie as well, and there's another type of thing that I was noticing about this movie, and again, I don't know if this is true, I don't know if this is there, and sometimes it's an easy thing to tag on, but I couldn't help but feeling it as well. And sometimes this happens when it's not a very straightforward narrative, quote unquote. The witches and the type of mystery and how much we see them in this movie, I couldn't help but wonder. Now again, there's a hell of a case here, and it's probably the most logical case that the witches in this movie are real, and I don't think the movie is saying any different, really. I suppose, like, I don't see much evidence to say that no, they aren't witches. But when a movie is a mood piece like this, it opens up other realms of which to interpret different things. So I couldn't really help but think this movie is a lot about anxiety and the inner voices of your head and the extreme nature of anxiety and doubting yourself. And I'm not sure if I'd go as far as mental illness, but the extreme type of paranoia sometimes of what you think people are saying about you and what your worst thoughts are about yourself if you have low self-esteem. I couldn't help but feeling that that was very much at the center of this movie as well. Now, at the same time, maybe they're just using that type of mental manipulation in favor of the plot that they're actually trying to tell about these actual witches. But I don't know. But let's just say there's a case that there's something else being either manipulated in you by the puppet master Dario Argento, or he also had this in mind, or he doesn't have this mind. He doesn't have this specific thing in mind, but it's almost a passive effect of shooting the movie this way. I don't know. But when she arrives, this movie is interesting to me because we often get these fish out of water movies where these city folk, they're in a place that they don't want to be in, right? Like a car breaks down in the middle of Hickville and they're scared because they're in a rural land and they're trying to get away from this land. Or sometimes characters are in a place, often horror movies, where they're not meant to be there and they're there by happenstance. And their main goal is to get away from there. But what heightens it is fear of the unknown. I feel like this movie works quite similar in many ways, except she's gone there voluntary. She's there for a reason, to establish a goal at this dance society. So she's willingly gone to a place that will give you the same type of feeling as stuck in rural America if you're driving to see your family from one city to the other. So there's that. So with that in mind, I think all the feelings she has and a lot of the things that she's experiencing is the anxiety of being in a different place. Now, whether that leads into the witches being real, like I said, I'm not really making the case that it isn't, but I'm saying that there's a hell of a lot of drama and internal drama being derived from the fact that she's in a place willingly that she doesn't want to be there. And I think the level of uneasiness she gets starts right from the beginning of that door, where there's another student and I can't remember because of the dubbing, but I think that student isn't from there as well. I could be wrong, but either way, her first exposure is someone being uneasy about the place she's now going to. So that sets off a spiral, if you will, where she begins to spiral at that point. Then the next thing is she's doing the dancing and she's weak. She's too weak to be able to dance. So she probably doesn't think she's a good enough dancer than as she is. And she's already uncomfortable. She's already away from home. So then all the corridors, all the whispers, all the things going on, all the heightened sense of mystery and the heightened sense of superstition that she is moving towards either is directly intertwined, shall we say, with her mental state, or it forces her to not know if it's her mental state or if there is witches, and maybe she gets to it later than she normally would. I don't know. But yeah, I thought that there was a very good element to it. And especially when you have the whispers with the soundtrack, which is brilliant. You have two scores that keep on rotating. You have one that reminds me of this guy, Jay Munley, this artist. He does these weird kind of almost monk type strange instrument songs on one of his albums. And then you have another one that plays almost again like a fairy tale. And it keeps on rotating back between these different ones, but you hear the witches and the witches. And again, like, that kind of makes sense in terms of if you ever see anyone with low self-esteem and who's always think people are talking about them, they do wonder if they're hearing things, or if people are talking about them, or if people, not to say as far as want to kill them, but yeah, I think we're following a character that has that psychology to an extent based on the place she's in. And there's other things that helps with this as well. Like I said, the dubbing, I'm very used to this based on spaghetti westerns. The type of blood, I think they use this similar type of red in spaghetti westerns that I watched. So there's lots of things that made me comfortable as well. And not least as much, I think someone like, what's his name, Darren Aronofsky, he must be influenced by someone like Dario Argento. His movies are very similar, even though they're completely different, if you catch my drift. And then there's this type of horror by, is it Robert Eggers, who, not to say is similar, but he certainly likes exploring the psychological elements of horror, again through maybe not very plot heavy stories, like something like The Witch, ironically, which I didn't like very much. So I am predisposed, or something like Hereditary, which I know you don't like. It does kind of work on, not to say a similar wavelength, but it's not like this was out of nowhere, like, what the hell is this guy talking about? What? It's like I was all right. I was all right with this new experience, shall we say. And even something like Nosferatu as well. There's definitely, I don't dislike this type of horror, but at the same time, this type of horror can go very wrong as well. And it was very nice to see Udo, whatever his name is, as well. Yeah, I did think it was him. And I'm just thinking, this guy pops up forever. This guy is always there. He must have, I'd love to see his filmography and all the different countries he worked in. You could make an around the world 8 movies show about this guy's career alone, maybe. But yeah, I liked the movie. I was really absolutely, not to say, yeah, I guess bombarded with stimulus in every frame of what this guy had to offer. And it's not to say I will be checking out what this guy is gonna, not what this guy has done, because he's gonna do next, should I say, because he's 80 something now. But let's just say if it was Spooktober next year and you're rewatching, I think Inferno is another one that he's done, I'd probably say, okay, well, when you watch that, send that my way and I'll have my thoughts on it as well. But yeah, had a good time with this one.
Yeah, Inferno is one that I haven't seen. I have seen the film, I think, that comes directly before this, which is Deep Red. And I didn't know this when I watched Suspiria either time. But the kind of main female actor from Deep Red, Daria Nicolodi, she's called. She was Argento's girlfriend at the time. And then she co-wrote Suspiria with him. And I think, I haven't looked into this too much, but I think she might have actually brought this idea to him, which is interesting because obviously Dario Argento is a man. His movies, they're not like the most male daisy of all of the giallo cinema, but all of the ones I've seen, they very much feel like you can guess the gender of the director pretty easily. Whereas Suspiria is unique. Well, I don't know if it's literally unique, but it's rare in how female centric it is. Not only is the protagonist female, as is the case in most horror movies, but all of the antagonists as well, and everyone, like the male characters like Udo Kier and the police that show up, these are people who just like pop in briefly for like almost cameos. By and large, the characters in the movie are female, and it's set in an incredibly female environment, which is like a dance academy. And then it's the supernatural element is about a coven of witches, which is again probably the most iconically female grouping, or whatever you want to put it, in terms of supernatural lore. So it's interesting that from his body of work, and I think he had kind of reached the peak of his fame when he made Suspiria, he then has this girlfriend who brings this idea to him. At least I think that's how it went. And they co-write it together, and they put out this film that is at least partially benefiting from having a female writer. And then when I watched it, I was like, is this a film about the sort of anxieties of female empowerment from a male perspective and stuff? And it's not to say that this is a film that's just like a academic, well, it's all symbolism for this. Like, no, it's a very direct, visceral movie. It's not an intellectual movie per se, but that's just an interesting kind of undercurrent to it that I wasn't aware of. I didn't know that this didn't come wholly from his mind. That's something that I've learned in the past week. So to answer your oh, by the way, I'm just going to put a little caveat into this voice note right now. I'm at home now with my 1-year-old, and he's a bit under the weather. I'm looking after him, so he's quiet right now. He's messing around, creating chaos on the floor, but he may start crying at any minute. I'll have to cut this short, but let me see how much I can squeeze in. Just first thing I'll say is I'm thrilled that you loved this movie, whether you had a really good time with it. I was debating in my head whether or not to even send you a voice note about it, because I've definitely sent some difficult stuff your way lately that you've really not enjoyed. And I know you said that, like, if it was a movie that you were already kind of intending to watch, then the responsibility sort of off my shoulder if you dislike it. But still, I just kind of don't want you. I don't want to be just constantly the person that's bringing you horror movies that you don't like. And it's really interesting hearing you talk through A, the fact that you liked this movie, B, why you liked it, and C, the kind of self-examination you're going through of like why you haven't liked things like Smile 2, and could this be a gateway to some other stuff? And that's like one of the joys of being a film fan. It's like when you watch a film, A, it ideally, if you like it, it lets you enjoy that film, but B, it also lets you enjoy other films. And I know for me, probably with all genres, but definitely I can track it very consciously with horror. Something like Smile 2, I can get much more out of it now than I would have done at a certain point. I think you kind of hit on some of those interesting things. But yeah, I'm just going to go back to the start of your voice note there, and some of the questions that you raised. So to answer your first question, did I watch it in English or Italian? I actually watched it twice over the past week, once in English, once in Italian. My guess was that the English version was kind of like the true version of it. Now, your voice note kind of contradicts that. So I was just sort of assuming that because it's not set in Italy, it's got an American star and all that kind of stuff. So I kind of just assumed that the English version was the sort of original version, if you will. But then it turned out that my sister wanted to watch it. Not my sister, my ultimate Freudian slipper. My wife wanted to watch it, but her sister was staying with us and wanted to, well, maybe could be convinced into watching it. And her sister speaks Italian, and my wife also speaks Italian. So we watched it in Italian for them with English subtitles. So I've seen both versions in the past week. You mentioned that it's such a visual feast that you kind of don't want to spend half the movie looking at the bottom of the screen reading subtitles. And yes, I feel the same way, and I enjoy the film more in English. But I think all the other Argentos I've watched in Italian, but I'm not sure actually. Now that I'm thinking about it, I may have watched some of them in English, because a lot of them have kind of international people coming to Rome and getting involved in a kind of murder mystery or something. And as you said, that all Italian films from this era, and from like many years of Italian cinema, they shoot them silent essentially, and then not only did they add all of the dialogue in post, but also all the sound effects and stuff. And I think that is just an example of how artificial these films are. And you touched on so much stuff about the artificiality of these films and how it kind of was evocative of theater and stuff like that. And I think, again, you talked about Tim Burton and Wes Anderson and these people whose films are incredibly artificial. Like, they're kind of the opposite of like a mumblecore movie, which is like trying to capture real reality. They're a fully constructed presentation. And I think not that this was necessarily a creative decision, it was just sort of the way things were done in that film industry, but having it so that everything you're hearing, all the dialogue, all of the sounds, and obviously the music, but that's kind of the same in every country, it's all being crafted to go along with the edited film. When you've kind of given in to artificiality as much as Argento's films do, you're poised to really lean into that and, give people something that's a really specific vision. You mentioned that you didn't find it scary. Yeah, I would say, like I said, when I watched it as a teenager, that smashing through the window bit was scary, definitely. Which is the kind of opening kill, when she's looking through the window with the lamp. I didn't find it that scary overall as a teenager, and I certainly didn't find it that scary now, this time. I find it very intense, though. It's very, very intense. I wouldn't say scary, but the music and the relentlessness of some of these extended sequences and the kind of like ratcheting up of like the volume, like the literal auditory volume that you're experiencing is a very, very intense experience. Not scary, but definitely arresting and overwhelming. And I think it's a very rare film that I can find scary that's this old. I think Texas Chainsaw Massacre would be an example of one that's about the same age. I think it's slightly older, 3 years older maybe. There's certain bits in Psycho that are like a bit of a, oh, Jesus Christ. But yeah, it's rare. Yeah, I think there's I don't know if we talked about Cat People a few years ago, which is got like one of the first jump scares with the bus sound effect. And that's an example of like, you watch an old classic horror movie, you're probably going to go the whole movie not scared, and then maybe, just maybe, there'll be one little bit that scares you. And actually, I do remember something happening in this movie that gave me a jump. I wish I could remember it, but I remember there was something happened at one point in Suspiria where I jumped backwards and I was scared, like I was shocked or whatever. And of course, jump scare is different to like sustained tension scare of like, don't go in there, don't go in. But I don't know, it's hard for a movie from this many years ago to scare me, but I think if I had been around at that time, I would have found it terrifying, because it just is, once films are dated, it's just really hard to be scared by them. People were terrified of the old Universal horror movies, and now I don't think it's, I really, the most susceptible to scares people around wouldn't find those movies scary, because it's just things get dated. And yes, I agree. The plot is very thin. I mean, the plot is girl joins dance academy in a foreign country, and there's weird shit going on. And that's the entire plot up until the final 15 minutes of the movie. And the final 15 minutes of the movie adds, it's witches. And there you've got the entire movie summarized, essentially. And I actually think that benefits this film. A lot of the Giallo films have very complicated thriller, noir, not noir, but like thriller sort of murder mystery plots that, like, just like Suspiria, their whole purpose of those movies is to do these crazy over the top kills and like really stylized dramatic sequences. The plot is just something to hang them on. So the fact that Suspiria hangs it on so little is kind of to its benefit. You can clearly see where the focus is. You referenced that I had sent you a voice note elsewhere, sort of trying to prep you for this movie because I thought you might struggle with it. I'm glad you didn't. I'm glad you didn't listen to that voice note because it's like you went in, you managed to like go in as sort of uncorrupted as possible and still really love the movie. But the essence of that voice note I sent you was that this, if you are interested in what this film is trying to do well, then you're going to like it. And if you need this film to do well things that this movie has zero interest in doing well, like having a good plot or good dialogue or whatever, then you're going to come up short. I was comparing it to Police Story, the Jackie Chan movie, the first one. I think one person can watch Police Story and call it a masterpiece and say it's like one of the best action movies of all time. And another person can watch Police Story and go, the plot's terrible, the drama, the like relationship, it scenes between the action movies, the dialogue and all that is terrible. The sets and everything look really cheap. And they could go, you know what? If a movie is failing on all of these different levels, then I am not interested in this movie. And what I would say to that person about Police Story is, the people making Police Story couldn't care less about those things. They're placing their focus on a specific thing. And if you watch it on that basis, then you can have an amazing time with Police Story. And that's kind of, and I you know, clearly you watched Suspiria with the right hat on because you just seem to have really, really liked it and had a good time with it. But I think that's, you know, a lot of films require you to watch them from the right perspective. But maybe horror, maybe genre cinema in general, but maybe horror more so, I don't know, has a bit more of a requirement to you be watching it in the right spirit. But yeah, anyway, glad that you hit it in the right way. To this point about like the kind of ability of some artists, like you said, Tim Burton being an example, to fully get their entire vision out onto the canvas. And as you said, we can't know what was in the vision inside their head that didn't make onto the canvas. But I agree that Argento and Wes Anderson, and I think they're more common than you have let on. I think like Jean-Pierre Jeunet, Guillermo del Toro, I think there's a lot of directors out there. And there's, you know, ones who are not doing supernatural stuff like Tarantino and stuff, where it feels very much like a complete vision. Obviously, like you said, we can never really know what was left on the mental cutting room floor, but it's great to see it. And it's great. You can sense that from the very beginning of this movie. I think the beginning is her, well, it's got that voiceover, and then it's her walking through the airport, walking out of the airport, and you've got the doors, the automatic doors that she's going to walk through, and every time they open, the music plays and they close, and then it's quiet, and she goes out, and it's just like an absolute fucking thunder. It's not literally a thunderstorm, but it's just like hailing down, torrential rain, wind. She's screaming for a taxi. They're all driving off. It's such ferocity. Like her walking out of that serene airport into that torrent of environmental abuse, which doesn't really let up. In what, like, that level of intensity doesn't let up until we've had the first 2 kills of the movie, because it kind of, she goes to the theater, she screams into the intercom, girl tries to turn her away. Then we follow the other girl who's kind of escaped. She goes back to that house. They have the smashing window kill, and then we have like brought up on the roof, and so much in that sequence is, and the whole movie is so fake. Like it's so the lighting doesn't make any sense. The locations are so heightened. That the apartment that they're in, the hanging scene where she crashes all the way down through that crazy skylight and goes down to the like just right below, or just touch, I think she's literally touching the ground when it like hangs her. I think she's already dead at that point anyway, but it's so crazy that from the get-go, and this is certainly true in a Tim Burton movie as well, you're like, Okay, all right. I'm in the palm of a singular artist's vision, and everything I see from here on out and experience is going to be like very specifically crafted to it doesn't have to be how someone sees the world, but it's how someone wants to make their art. And it's great to see that, because it's just not, it's unfortunately kind of rare that you get that. What else? You mentioned that I had referred to it as kind of operatic. So when I said operatic, I wasn't actually referring to the kind of stage artifice. I was actually referring to the emotional or just like tonal heightened nature of this movie, where if someone's going to get killed, they're going to draw it out massively. It's going to take as long as it possibly can. It's going to be as extreme as it can. Every facial expression is going to be as contorted and over the top. They're pushing the drama to operatic levels. And I think if you're not on the wavelength of this movie, that could be sort of, oh, got a little fake kitchen here and he's trying to push it over. Yeah, that could be like tiresome. But if you are on the bandwidth of the movie, then I think it works really well. You talked a lot about how the film, you kind of started to think about the film and view the film through the lens of dance. And you talked about Scream, for example, Ghostface running around. I think like that's one particular way of articulating it. It's certainly, I think, it's definitely a valid entry point into thinking about choreography and movement and the movement of bodies in horror. But whatever way you choose to phrase it, whether you draw a direct comparison with the tradition of dance, which I think neither of us really knows much about, but is a recurring theme in Smile 2 and Suspiria and plenty of movies. I think what I would just to sort of extend that idea out about a bit, because you talked about how when you started to think about it that way and you started to appreciate these films as, I'm not saying you're thinking them directly as dance movies, but that you're kind of considering the sort of allegorical dance of movement of the people across the screen as like one of the things that these films are focused on or that they're offering. I think that is definitely something that I've gained more of an appreciation for. It's the physicality of the media. And I'm not just talking physicality like the challenge of it, like maybe you watch an action movie and Tom Cruise is really hanging off that plane, but it's the physicality of the storytelling and the kind of beauty of how it's designed, if that makes any sense at all. It's going right back to the Universal horror movies, it almost like Jim Carrey-esque levels of people contorting their body and presenting themselves as like very heightened, outlandish characters and sweeping across the scene in interesting ways onto slashers. Scream is a perfect example, where the kind of dance, I guess, the movement of the people, the chase, the pursuit through the screen is so hypnotic. I think getting in tune with the physical storytelling of horror is definitely something that elevates the medium. And where we keep coming back to Smile 2, I think it is a good example of that, not because it's about a performer who's also a dancer, but because once you kind of start to appreciate that, then even if it's not literally a dance and it's just like someone acting the way people do in stage productions, something where the expression, the reactions are big, every emotion is sort of like writ large and telegraphed in this big, like, again, kind of operatic way, that seems less hammy and it more seems like it's in conversation with the physical violence and the chasing and everything like that. So all kind of works together pretty well. Whether you use dance as the kind of way of understanding it, or just a generally more physical medium than, like a standard thriller, like a kind of a more of a murder mystery thriller that's not a horror movie. You raise an interesting point about the witches being real. Are they real? I know you're not kind of like saying that you're not trying to make a claim to there being some sort of objective, correct reading of the film that the witches aren't real. I think it is obviously a very dreamlike, nightmarish kind of film, and the way I look at this sort of stuff is like, I find it really boring when people try and take something as like slippery and ethereal as art and try and reduce it down to a science of like, the actual correct interpretation of this is that this happened and this didn't happen or whatever. And you don't do that, and you're not doing that. But I'm saying that if you were to try and take that approach of it, are the witches real? Let's work out what the actual truth of it. And that's like kind of a pointless exercise, which again, I'm not accusing you of doing. But what I really appreciate is a film that even lets you kind of like, or kind of accommodates you in watching it in different ways. So you could watch this film and be like, my interpretation of this film, kind of my experience with this film is with the witches being real. Like, that's my kind of experience that I have when I watch it. That's what's going through my mind. That's what I feel. And that's certainly true of me. But you could also go and simultaneously, because this is not reality, this is art, you can have contradictions. Simultaneously, you could go, this is a dream / nightmare about the anxieties of being away from home. And you talked about how in a lot of films, you're stranded somewhere, whereas she's come voluntarily to this place. And there's all sorts of things that you could talk about with that. When you move somewhere and you go off to university, or you move to a new place, and then you feel terrible there, and you're like, I've actually condemned myself to something bad. And then you start to kind of be irrational about what threats are actually there. And I think it's not a binary thing of like, well, if you think the witches are real, then that dismisses that. It's like, no, you can kind of watch this film on multiple levels. And that's why I said, like, when it comes to the gender stuff in this film, I'm not making the claim that this is some sort of like intellectual work or something. I think it's a very visceral, direct, simple movie in many ways. And I think you can watch it on that basis, and you're not missing out on anything. But I think in its simplicity, it's created space, maybe intentionally, maybe unintentionally, to have all sorts of other quite stirring themes bubble up in your experience with it. So yeah, another kind of compliment that I could pay to it there. And yeah, just I guess like I'm just glad that that things in this film haven't been alienating to you. You mentioned how the blood in giallo movies, or I guess like old Italian movies, is really camp and ridiculous. It doesn't look remotely like blood, not in its color, not in its texture or anything. But you watch that and you think of spaghetti westerns, which I know is something really beloved to you. So it seems to have managed to kind of sneak through a lot of your prejudices when it comes to film, and I'm just glad you had a great time with it. Have you seen the Luca Guadagnino remake? Because I watched first watched Suspiria when I was a teenager, and then I guess I watched the remake in my mid-30s, give or take. And so when I watched the remake, I didn't really remember much about the original. I remembered the gag with the smashing through the window, and I remember that being in the remake. But other than that, everything I was seeing in the remake was sort of like, I couldn't tell what was being created anew for that movie. But there is one thing now, obviously having seen them both relatively close. I mean, I guess the remake came out maybe like 7 years ago or something, 6-7 years, something like that. So I can still remember enough about it. I can say that there's a lot of stuff in the remake that's from this movie, which I guess is logical. But there's the worst thing about that remake, in my opinion. There's this subplot that really doesn't work. I mean, I think it's almost like an exceptional case of a useless subplot that should have been cut out of the movie, about an old man kind of traveling back and forth between East and West Berlin. And it doesn't work for many different reasons that I won't get into. I'm not sure if you've seen the movie, but that is an invention. I can't, in my head, piece together that character and that plot with this movie. So be interesting, maybe I know your memory is better than mine, be interesting to hear kind of what your relationship is with the remake, if you've seen it. And if you haven't seen it, now that I know that you've liked some Guadagnino work and you've obviously liked this movie, does that now put the remake on your radar as something you need to check out? I almost feel like I want to go back and check it out again. But yeah, great movie, great music, great time. And like I said, I've seen a few of his movies, but there's also like very, very significant Argento movies that I haven't seen. So this has me like re-energized to go and kind of tick off some of the other ones.
Yeah, just to answer your first question about the Luca Guadagnino film, Suspiria, I have not seen it. I'm a big fan of Challengers. I think that's an amazing film. Now, I know you haven't seen it, so don't believe the hype that I just give you, but like I had a great time with it. Like it's not going to change the world, but it just sat up right for me with everything that I want in a Luca Guadagnino film. I also really like Bigger Splash. Really like that for the most part as well. But Suspiria, like Dario Argento's version is like a cool 90 minutes. And this remake, which is another reason why I didn't watch it, it's like close to 3 hours long. And now you tell me that there's a subplot that's completely unnecessary in the remake. I'm going to be in no rush to go see that. And I feel like, unlike when we did High and Low and I saw the remake first, I feel like I've seen the definitive version of this movie and I don't need to see any more. Like I couldn't get any better of whatever movie they're trying to tell. I'm not going to get a better version than this. And I'm certainly not going to get a 2-hour 50-minute version that's better than this as well. So now if you had saw the original, if you had saw the remake this time, we would have had a whole high and low, highest to lowest debacle again, and I would have had to this time having seen it in reverse. So I wonder if I did go and see it now, I'd be very much taking your position that you did in highest to lowest, or whichever version was the original. High and low, God, they're totally infused together now in my mind. I'm really glad that you watched both versions, the Italian and the English, in the same week, so you can put to bed my curiosity and my question over which version should have I watched. And I'm glad that you seem to have concurred that in a movie that's a visual medium, I mean, when this movie specifically is visual as they can come, that the subtitles might have slightly made it a lesser version. But yeah, like I said, this movie evoked dance and theater and movement in relation to that conversation, and I did think of it in relation to Smile 2, but again, that's about a pop star, in relation to movement as well. But like you said, I never really thought about the physicality and the movement in horror movies in that way before, and I don't know why now that it's clicked somewhat in that way. And again, I'm wondering now. It's easy to say this without being in the throes of the movie and not having a great time, but I'm now wondering. I'm now thinking about the Blob, and I'm thinking, was there a way to look at that in that way? Just, I remember when you were talking about the set pieces after set pieces, and again, I was talking about, what was it? John Woo film. What was that movie called? I can't remember. Her Target. And obviously, when you have a great time with something, I'm thinking, is there another way of watching those in a set piece kind of way now that would be different? But again, easy to say when you're not actually watching the movie, not having a good time. And I went back to the original voice note that in our just everyday life chat where you try to tee up Suspiria without giving anything away and evoked Police Story. It's like a masterful job of trying to say something without saying absolutely anything, and try and tune in a wavelength of appreciation for something that I haven't seen yet without spoiling anything got to do with the movie. It's quite a dance, my friend, quite a dance. And well done for attempting it. I'm not sure how well that would have helped me or how well I would have understood it, but we'll never know. And that's interesting what you're talking about with the screenwriter as well, who was also in a relationship with him at the time, and the female gaze, and you've been able to identify that. Well, I'm not sure if you went as far as the female gaze, but certainly it's a female perspective, I suppose, is a better way of putting that. And you were able to identify that in this movie. Oi, Jesus! Cats broke through the door, having a mad fight there. What? Are you okay? Come here. That was like something out of a horror movie. Yeah, it's interesting that you were able to identify that immediately, and it does kind of add another layer to it, doesn't it? If there was, I don't know, we're speculating, but if there was a creative clash, or how much harmony was there in the creation of this movie? Apparently, she was genuinely interested in occults and stuff like that. So yeah, that's pretty cool. And like you mentioned, it is very boring when you try to bring an explanation of a movie down to a science. And you mentioned that, there's regarding the witches, and then there's another way of looking at it in terms of the things that it evokes, and that the simplicity of the plot as opposed to other movies in the genre that you've mentioned allows this element and these feelings to breathe more. I suppose there's another third interpretation. Well, there's infinite interpretations, but I guess there's another thing regarding the witches and the anxieties and the dreamlike sequences and everything like that. I wonder, like, if somebody is writing a movie like this, or if somebody's trying to evoke feelings, like you mentioned, this movie is very intense. It's not scary, but it's intense. That's a great way of putting it. if you're creating a movie like this, and there is witches and there's also these other feelings floating around, maybe you're thinking, okay, well, what would it be like if somebody was in this place and there was something that they didn't really know what was going on. They weren't privy to the scenes that we have seen as the audience in terms of an overall arc. The main character doesn't see the blind guy getting killed by the dog, which is a great scene. The main character doesn't see the eyes in the window, which is fantastic, and in a stabbing scene. The main character isn't privy to all that. So what would it be like being in that environment and not really knowing what's going on until very late? Well, it'd be like social anxiety in general, the feeling of your body being on edge, not sure if you're hearing whispers, not sure if people is talking about you. It would be like that anyway. So maybe it's not so much as you stumble upon these feelings. Maybe the filmmakers are also using those feelings to give you a sense of something you can relate to as an audience member, because you can't relate to witches being real, but you can relate to all these other human emotions that are used and weaponized against the main character and us, the audience, to convey that feeling. So there is also that as well, which is brilliant. And just the other thing I forgot to touch on as well, I'm also wanting to watch The Witches, the remake in 1999 or 1990. But the final moments in this movie are brilliant as well, where she finally gets behind the curtain. There's all these witches, or I don't know if they're witches, but they must be. They're chopping something in the kitchen, and she just ducks past at that point. And then, like you mentioned, exploitation. But there's a character in the room, and then they're basically invisible in that moment. I think it's the head of the coven, and she's about to be attacked by, I think, I can't remember who she's getting attacked by. Was it kind of her doppelganger, or am I just imagining things? I can't remember now. But like, all that is brilliant. So as much as the plot is a bit wishy-washy and it feels like a vague nightmare up until that point, when you get to the final 15 minutes, that is as vivid a dream and nightmare can be. As in, the final moments before you wake up, and in the moments when you do wake up, where there's this vivid memory that just stays with you, along with the level of intensity from the bad dream you've had when you wake. That's what that final sequence leads to. And yeah, that's brilliant as well. So yeah, maybe Inferno for Spooktober next year will be pretty cool. But yeah, glad to watch it, and great to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I think Inferno was actually the one that I had my sights set on next. So yeah, definitely up for putting that in next year's Spooktober. I think that's a great way of putting it, that the intensity of the final, there's many intense sequences throughout the film, but the intensity, it's almost like the crescendo of that final 10 minutes is very like the dying moments of a dream, where it's like you can't even stay awake anymore. The dream has reached its apex and you just wake up because that's the end. And I think that's very much in line with the Argento agenda, which is a bit of alliteration for you there, where the movie reaches this extreme, insane point, and then it's like, and we're done here, roll credits. Like, there's no reason to have a scene of that girl back in America, happy, now in a nice dance academy, where it's like, no, she's fucking take down the witches, whole place goes up in flames. Like, that's not even really explained. I guess like when she kills the head witch, all the other witches burst into flames or something. But it's like, it reaches that level of insanity, and then it's just like, I guess what you'll be wanting now is the credits and the movie to be over, because I'm not gonna fucking waste your time. Like that's as good as this movie is gonna get. So it's kind of like dreamlike in that way, how dreams often end. I will say with the remake, the Guadagnino, now I'd forgotten how long it was. I saw it in the cinema, which sometimes makes films not feel quite as long, but the music's great by Tom York. There's lots of cool visuals in it. I think it's far from a masterpiece. I wouldn't say it's one of his best movies, but it's not. I wouldn't say it's a bad movie either. It's more just like, yeah, I think it's worth watching for someone who watches as many movies as you do. It's worth watching. But yeah, you're definitely right in saying that this is the definitive edition. And yeah, with the dubbing stuff. So for me, I generally like the original version of films. And there's very rare exceptions. There's very rare movies where I'm like, I'd be happy enough watching the dub. And here are the usual terms of that. Animation, where it's where every version is kind of dubbed in the sense that cartoons can't literally speak, even though they are often animated to a specific voice recording. But not all animation, right? So if I'm watching an animated, like My Neighbor Totoro, for example, which is set in the Japanese countryside, is very culturally specific, then it's like an immersion breaking thing for me to watch that, to like see American accents coming out of that. But if the movie feels less kind of tethered to a specific language, I suppose, or accent, then with animation, I'm less fussy about that. And then this obviously is a very unique case, but Italian old school movies, they are dubbed. Doesn't matter if you watch them in Italian or you watch them in another language, you're watching a dubbed thing. And also with, for example, Suspiria, they're so not set in any world. Like, to me, this movie doesn't feel remotely German. Like, this doesn't have an ounce of the reality of Germany in it. So for me, watching it not in German or not in Italian or what, I could watch, if I spoke Japanese, I could watch this in Japanese, and I feel like it would be almost as culturally legitimate a language to be watching it in. Now, I appreciate that it's a rare film that kind of meets that grade, but I definitely think with this one, because and his films in general are so multicultural, even though most of them are set in Italy, but they're so not set in our world and they're also dubbed, even if you watch them in Italian. So I think it, for me, it kind of works, but yeah, it's a bit of a unique case. And then the last point, sorry, I'm just picking up my son here now. The last point that you raised there that I want to touch on was the female writer thing. So I think I didn't sense that there was like in fact, I didn't sense anything when I was watching it as it coming from a female voice. Like I said, I've only learned after the fact that it was co-written by a woman, possibly originated by that woman. I think she kind of brought the concept to him. So I watched it as a film by a man, kind of like singularly by a man. But it's interesting now, after the fact, learning that one of the most female-centric movies, like horror movies ever, at least in terms of like iconic horror movies, I would say this is more of a female-centric movie than The Descent, for example, because I think the whole culture and lore of witches and witch covens and everything like that has so much symbolism of women bonding together and stuff like that. But I think this is more a female-centric movie than just it's got a bunch of women in it. Like it runs deeper than that. So then after the fact, finding out that its kind of co-creator is a woman is very, very interesting, and it kind of like raises other questions about it. So again, nothing specific, but just more texture to the work. And again, like we kind of keep coming back to, it's definitely a film that you can appreciate on a very surface, kind of shallow level, and be fully satisfied with your experience, or a film that that just naturally evokes a whole bunch of maybe not super refined or specific feelings. It's not like you got like specific theories. I mean, I'm sure some people have written big long essays that are very pointed, but for me, it's more just like rich themes to delve into. And I think if you're going to make a witch movie, this is like a great example of it, even though it barely has any witches being witches in it. In fact, most of the kills in the movie feel like you don't even know what's happened really until kind of you get quite late into the film. To that point, actually, I saw this movie years ago, so I knew watching it now that it was a witch movie. But where did you find out? I think it's in the Udo Kier scene where witches are first mentioned, or maybe I'm wrong on that. But it feels like they really bury the lead. Like maybe you could go up until the final 15 minutes before you even realize that there's any witch involvement in the movie.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. Because to begin with, I thought this was a slasher movie. With the first thing through the window, I thought, oh, this is a slasher movie? And then it was they're saying someone got killed. So I'm thinking, okay, is it going to be a slasher movie around this place? And there's an actress in there who looks very like Linda Fiorentino, and then there's another an actor in it who looks a bit like Dave Franco, and then the main actress looks a bit like Emma Watson. So I'm like, okay, are we gonna get a slasher movie here? And then I'm thinking, well, I remember the guy's hand being a bit hairy. Is he a bit monstery? And then you have a little bit of that Frankenstein looking guy who everyone's treating ugly. I'm thinking, oh, are we meant to think it's him? Is this red herring number one? Because obviously it's not going to be him, right? Or maybe it is him and she's the only one that she's been nice to him, so maybe he won't do anything to her. And then I'm thinking, okay, is this a slasher movie? Is this a monster movie? Is this a monster slasher movie? And then after a while, I stopped caring because it was so long since any actual stuff happened after that. And I think, I don't remember at what point, but I think I heard it in the soundtrack first when it said the witches. Witches are the witches. And then when the guy is walking with his dog, and obviously if they're saying I think we're meant to know it's witches by that point, but when he's walking his dog and the dog ends up attacking him, then I'm thinking, okay, well, it is definitely supernatural now at this point, which is a great scene. And I think I heard it in the soundtrack first, is what tipped me off to it. The witches. Now, I could be completely wrong about that. And it would be quite the coincidence, though. Then, yeah, so for some reason, I never thought it was a ghost. Like, because the stuff like the maggots, the stuff like the dog killing him, that could all be supernatural stuff. But yeah, I think I heard it in the soundtrack was my first tip about that, in the whispers. But I could be completely wrong. But yeah, you're right. There's a long time where you don't even know what's going on in this movie. And despite the fact that there's a murder very early on, but the movie is so artsy, I thought it was just an artsy way of showing terror of someone getting stabbed. But you're right. It has to be said, you never feel like it's a letdown when it is the witches. You feel like it's thematically on point.
God, we didn't even talk about the maggots. Jesus Christ. Fucking horrific. Like, and that's again, just like the coiled wire. It's like, he just comes up with such epic, crazy shit that you're so stimulated and you're so fucking shocked. And yeah, it's amazing. My wife has like a massive fear with maggots. Like seeing one maggot on screen is like a horrible experience for her. So when that sequence was coming along, I was like, I'd already watched it, so I was like, stop watching now. And then she had to close her eyes and block her ears for about 5 minutes while they're dealing with all the maggots. But yeah, brilliant stuff. And yeah, you know, like you're talking about, like, you know, is it this guy? Is it like the caretaker guy? I was like, maybe it is. Like, ultimately, at the end of the movie, the main takeaway is everything that we've seen was the witches, but specifically whose arm was there or who slit whose throat or how it all went down, haven't a clue. But I know what kind of evil sort of body of people have executed all this. But yeah, it doesn't really matter. It's all just, it's a perfect case of like, are you entertained? Yes. All right. Well, that's what he was going for. You don't need to bring it back to any more cohesion than that. It was just like a great experience. So, and like you said, nice and short as well. I think maybe if this film was 2 hours long, it would struggle with some more of that ambiguity. But yeah. Anyway, little one's calling me, so I'll get on to my duties. Another good movie in the bag.
Your mailbox is full. Please delete new or stored messages which you no longer need so that new messages may be received.